Two children died of measles in Texas just last year. Both were unvaccinated. Both were healthy before they got sick, no underlying conditions. Just measles, a disease the United States had declared eliminated by the year 2000, a disease we had a 97% effective vaccine for. Those are the first measles deaths in a child in this country in more than 20 years. Since January of 2025, the United States has confirmed more than 4,600 measles cases. 93% of those people were either unvaccinated or whose vaccination status was unknown. We are at risk of losing our measles elimination status, a public health achievement that took decades to build. I've been thinking about this episode for a while, and I want to say something directly up front. This is not a political episode. Public health is not a political issue. It never was, and it never should be. And the fact that it became one is part of what I want to talk about today. I'm going to use data. I'm going to explain what data means in plain language, and I'm going to connect it to something that I think a lot of people in my world, the aesthetic medicine world, haven't fully sat with. Because the same population that have been most vocally skeptical of the FDA-approved vaccines is, in many cases, the same population injecting peptides from compounding pharmacies, stacking supplements they bought from Instagram, and putting things into their bodies that have never really been through a single clinical trial. And I think that deserves an honest look. I'm Chris Lee. This is Honestly. It's the show where I give you my honest opinion about medicine, aesthetic medicine, and all sorts of things, as if it was coming from a trusted friend. Let me start with where the science is. Not where social media says it is, not where politicians say it is, where peer-reviewed evidence, decades of data, and reproducible research actually puts us. Vaccines are safe and effective. That is the scientific consensus, not a talking point, not a position. A consensus backed by more data than almost any other question in modern medicine. The MMR vaccine, the one that prevents measles, mumps, and rubella, is 97% effective after 2 doses. To put that into terms that mean something, if you vaccinate 100 people and expose all 100 to measles, 97 of them won't get sick. The other 3 may get a much more mild version of the disease. No drug in my field, no supplement on any shelf, no peptide in any compounding pharmacy comes close to that efficacy number with that safety record. Let me give you a comparison to that might help make this feel real. If your surgeon told you before a procedure that there's a 97% chance it goes exactly as planned with no serious or any real complications, you would feel really good about that surgery. You'd probably book it. That's what the MMR vaccine delivers on measles prevention. And it's been delivering since 1963. Do vaccines have side effects? Of course, yes. Almost every medical intervention does. The MMR vaccine can cause a sore arm, mild fever, and in rare cases, a temporary rash. Serious adverse events in approximately 1 to 2 per million doses, things like anaphylaxis and allergic reactions. For context, your risk of a serious complication from measles itself, if you're unvaccinated, is roughly 1 in 1,000 who need to be hospitalized, about 1 to 2 per 1,000 who die. The vaccine's risk profile is not comparable to the disease risk profile. They are not even in the same universe. Now, do vaccines cause autism? This is a profound no. This is not an open question in science. More than 30 studies across multiple countries and tens of millions of children have investigated this specific hypothesis since 1998, since the Wakefield paper first suggested it. Now, if you don't know, Andrew Wakefield's paper was eventually retracted. This is the paper that linked vaccines to autism. His medical license was revoked, and every independent study designed to test his hypothesis has failed to find the link. The scientific community has done the work to check, and the answer is no. People who have tried to prove that hypothesis have failed. So how do we get here? How does a country with 97% effective vaccine against a potentially fatal disease end up with a 35-year measles high? How does a scientific consensus that has been examined from every conceivable angle get treated by millions of people as either uncertain or corrupt? This didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen because the science changed. It happened because of a specific documented set of forces that have been eroding institutional trust for decades and that found their fullest expression in the social media era. The first thing to understand is that trust in institutions has been declining for a long time. Trust in government, trust in media, trust in pharmaceutical companies, trust in medicine. All of it has been declining since roughly the 1970s, and for some legitimate reasons. There have been real scandals that fracture trust. Pharmaceutical companies have hidden data and pushed medications on the public that they knew were harmful. Think of the opiate epidemic. Government agencies have failed people time and time again. Those are not fabrications. They happened, and they are valid arguments. And when trust erodes broadly, it creates an environment where bad actors can exploit legitimate grievances to spread information that goes far beyond what the evidence supports. But then the thing about science is that it's reproducible by independent parties. And numbers, although they can be used in misleading ways, they don't lie. The second thing to understand is how misinformation spreads differently than information. A 2018 MIT study found that false news stories spread 6 times faster than true ones on social media. They reach more people and penetrate deeper into networks. False news is more novel, more emotionally engaging, more fear-based, and more shareable than accurate information. Because accurate information is often nuanced, uncertain at the edges, and not designed to provoke a reaction. Vaccines are safe and effective with a known side effect profile doesn't go viral. Now, the government is hiding what vaccines are doing to your children. That does. It feeds into that fear and that distrust of every institution in order to get into your head. The third thing to understand is what researchers call the naturalness bias, a deeply human tendency to believe that things categorized as natural are inherently good and things categorized as artificial or pharmaceutical are inherently suspect. This isn't rational, but it's real. And it's exploitable. It's why people who would never consider eating a wild mushroom they couldn't identify will take a supplement with a name they can't pronounce, sourced from a facility they've never audited, based on a claim that is all natural. And when you think about what vaccines do, introduce a small foreign protein into our immune system so that our system is primed and ready to recognize and attack any microbe that has that protein, that now recognizable but foreign protein, if it ever sees it again, there's really nothing more natural, as it has been happening since the evolution of our immune system, long before humans even walked this earth. Vaccines only harness what we have inside us to prepare for future attacks, lessen the burden of disease, and keep us out of hospitals, alive and walking. Public health should never have become a partisan issue. I want to say that clearly. There's nothing more bipartisan than a deadly microbe on a mission. Viruses do not check voter registration. Bacteria do not have a political affiliation. When we allow public health questions to become politically sorted, where one party's voters tend to vaccinate and another party's voters tend to not, we have created a situation where the disease doesn't just harm the individual who made the choice. It harms the infant who's too young to be vaccinated. It harms the immunocompromised or pregnant patient who can't get the vaccine for medical reasons. It harms every person in a community who depends on something called herd immunity to keep them safe. So, what is herd immunity? And what is it in real terms? It doesn't mean everyone is immune. It means that when enough people in a population are immune, either through vaccination or prior infection, a contagious disease can't find enough susceptible hosts to sustain its transmission. It runs out of road. For measles specifically, we need 95% of the population vaccinated to achieve herd immunity. During the 2024-2025 school year, the national MMR vaccination rate among kindergartners was 92.5%. That's down from 95.2% before the pandemic. That 2.5 drop, although sounds small, is approximately 28,000 kindergartners unprotected. And measles, one of the most contagious pathogens known to science, capable of lingering in the air for 2 hours and infecting 9 out of 10 unvaccinated people exposed to it, found them. Now, how did vaccination become politically sorted? It's a long answer, but part of it involves the deliberate framing of public health recommendations as government overreach, pharmaceutical industry profit motive, and infringement on personal liberty. These framings resonate, not because they're accurate descriptions of the vaccine science, but because they tap into a pre existing distrust of those institutions that we talked about. In some cases, that earned some distrust. The manipulation works by taking real grievances, legitimate concerns about pharmaceutical industry influence, legitimate concerns about government transparency, and using them to delegitimize scientific conclusions that are actually very well supported. On top of that, most of America has had herd immunity from measles for the past 30 years, from polio since 1950s, or benefited from disease eradication through vaccination like with smallpox, which means many of the vaccine opponents and proponents alike have never lived with these diseases like people did before the vaccines. Did you know that prior to vaccines, as recently as the early 1900s, 20% of all children died before the age of 5? That's 1 in 5 kids. In a group of 20 kids, 4 of them are dying before the age of 5. Let that sink in. That's from diseases like diphtheria, smallpox, measles, pertussis, also known as whooping cough. And that's just the ones who died. There were many more that were extremely sick or had long-term significant disability and had to live the rest of their lives inside an iron lung. Obviously, modern medicine in general has evolved and treatments have improved in general. But we don't see this stuff nowadays, and we as a society forget how bad things can be, so it leaves room for arguments against. And that is valid. Arguments for and against treatments should always be taking place, but through the scientific method and by data-driven fact, not by feelings or grifters trying to benefit financially or politically off of your fears. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is currently the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. That means he oversees the CDC, the FDA, and the NIH, the 3 agencies most directly responsible for vaccine policy and public health infrastructure in the United States. I think the documented public record of his stated positions is relevant for anyone trying to understand the current public health environment. So I want to talk it through factually. RFK Jr. has, over many years, publicly promoted the claim that vaccines cause autism. As I noted earlier, this claim has been examined in more than 30 studies across multiple countries involving tens of millions of children and has not been supported. The original paper that proposed this link was retracted, and its author lost his medical license for ethical violations in how the study was conducted. During his Senate confirmation hearings, RFK Jr. was asked directly, in yes or no questions, whether he believes vaccines are safe and effective, including specifically the MMR vaccine, the shingles vaccine, and the DTaP vaccine. He did not answer yes or no. He provided what Senate Finance Committee described as copied and paste boilerplate non-responses. Senator Wyden, the ranking member, stated that he gave Kennedy a dozen opportunities to confirm he would maintain integrity when it comes to vaccine science. Kennedy declined each one. In November of 2025, under HHS direction, the CDC revised its longstanding statement that vaccines do not cause autism. The CDC website was changed to say that the consensus that vaccines don't cause autism is not an evidence-based claim. The change was widely condemned by public health organizations as false. The American Academy of Pediatrics, the Infectious Disease Society of America, and dozens of scientific bodies objected. Earlier this year, Kennedy reportedly proposed that the NIH spend $5 billion, more than a tenth of its annual budget, to study the link between vaccines and autism. The NIH director ultimately declined, noting that the agency had already dedicated substantial resources to autism research and that the hypothesis had been sufficiently examined and disproven. I'm not characterizing these as facts, I'm stating them. What they represent in terms of current public health environment and what they have contributed to the measles situation I described at the top of this episode is something each listener can assess for themselves. So, why am I, a plastic surgeon, even talking about this? There's something that I see in my practice every single week that I think represents one of the more striking contradictions in the current health culture conversation. I have patients who are genuinely skeptical of FDA-approved vaccines. Vaccines that went through years, sometimes decades or more, of clinical trials before they reached a single arm. And some of those same patients are also taking supplements and peptides that have never been through a single phase 1 trial, never been reviewed by the FDA before they hit the market, never had anyone prove they work or even that they don't harm you. So, what is the FDA approval process for a drug or vaccine, and what does it look like? Because I think most people don't know the specifics. Before a new drug or vaccine can be tested in a single human being, it has to go through years and years of preclinical research, laboratory studies, animal studies, toxicology assessments. Only 1 in 1,000 compounds that begin laboratory testing ever make it to human testing. The ones that do then go through 3 phases of clinical trials. In phase 1, a small group of typically healthy volunteers receives the drug just to evaluate safety and identify side effects, not to test whether it works. Phase 2 expands to a larger group of patients with an actual condition, testing whether the drug works and continuing safety monitoring. Phase 3 involves thousands to tens of thousands of patients, which confirms effectiveness over a broad population, comparing to existing treatments and gathering comprehensive safety data. After all of that, which typically takes 10 to 12 years and hundreds of millions of dollars, the drug company submits everything to the FDA for review. The FDA then spends 6 to 10 months reviewing the full data package before making an approval decision. And after approval, phase 4, post-market surveillance, continues to monitor the drug in real world indefinitely. That is what stands between a compound and your arm when it comes to getting the vaccine. And to be honest, there are problems with that system. There are more problems than I can fit into this one podcast. But one of those problems is not that the FDA is approving unsafe treatments or preventions. Now, let me tell you what stands between a supplement and your body. Under the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, a law called DSHEA, the FDA is not authorized to approve dietary supplements for safety and effectiveness before they are marketed. In many cases, a manufacturer can formulate a product, put it in a bottle, and start selling it without notifying the FDA at all. The burden of proof is reversed. The FDA has to prove that a supplement is unsafe to remove it from the market. The manufacturer doesn't have to prove it's safe before selling it. Since DSHEA passed in 1994, the dietary supplement market has grown 20 times over. Tens of thousands of products on the market. No pre-market safety proof required. And the industry pumps out money. It's a $230 billion industry and is projected to be $430 billion by 2030. That's in 4 years. That is a lot of unregulated market selling you something with very little science to back it up for efficacy or for safety. Peptides exist in an even more ambiguous space. Many of the peptides being used in wellness and aesthetic medicine right now, BPC 157, TB 500, CJC 1295, ipamorelin, among others, are not FDA approved for human use. They are research chemicals. Many are available through compounding pharmacies operating in a regulatory gray zone. There is limited peer-reviewed human clinical trial data on their long-term safety. They're not supplements. They're not even classified as supplements in most cases. They exist outside of formal regulatory framework that governs both drugs and food products. And I want to be precise here. I'm not saying peptides or supplements are dangerous. Some of them have real and interesting clinical potential. I offer some in my practice. What I am saying is that the person who refuses a vaccine because they don't trust the FDA's approval process and then injects a peptide that has never been through an FDA approval process has not arrived at a consistent position. They haven't rejected pharmaceutical industry oversight in favor of something cleaner. They've rejected 10 years of documented safety data in favor of something that has no safety data at all. That is not skepticism. That is a different kind of trust. One that is directed not by evidence, but by something else. Why is that? Why are people willing to pay good money for some unproven injection that might make their skin look better or feel better and refuse the free injection that saves lives? Is it the mandate? Although there isn't a mandate. Is it because it promises an aesthetic benefit and not an intangible safety benefit? Is it seeing the result in their own eyes? Is it marketing? Is it cultural identity and the aesthetics of what feels natural versus feels institutional? I don't honestly know. Maybe it's everything, but it is an interesting question to think about. Let me tell you what I'd tell a patient who sat across from me and said they weren't sure about vaccines. First, I would take the question seriously. Skepticism is not the same as ignorance. And people who ask hard questions about what goes in their bodies are doing something right in principle. The question isn't wrong. The answer just has to be honest. Second, I would ask them what specifically they're concerned about, because vaccines, as an entire category, that contains a lot of different products. Someone who's uncertain about a new mRNA platform for a novel pathogen is having a different conversation than someone who's uncertain about the MMR vaccine that has been used since 1963 and has been studied in hundreds of millions of people. Third, I would walk through the data with them exactly the way I've done today, specifically with real numbers, with comparisons that make the numbers meaningful, and with an honest acknowledgement of what we know and what remains uncertain. Because science is always honest about the edges of certainty. That's not a weakness of science, it's the whole point, and we should always be trying to figure out that edge. Fourth, I would point out the consistency question. If you're consuming unregulated supplements based on Instagram claims, if you're taking peptides from a compounding pharmacy based on bro science forums, you are already making health decisions under conditions of far less certainty than what surrounds the MMR vaccine. I'm not saying that to shame anyone. I'm saying it because I think intellectual honesty requires us to apply the same standard of skepticism across the board, not selectively in ways that happen to align with our cultural tribe. And finally, I'd be honest about what's at stake. This isn't abstract. 2 children died from the measles in Texas last year. The United States is at risk of losing a public health status it spent decades earning. People who cannot get vaccinated for medical reasons, newborns, immunocompromised patients, people undergoing chemotherapy, pregnant patients, depend on everyone who can get vaccinated to do so. This isn't just a personal choice in an isolated sense. It has consequences for people who didn't make that choice. And all this is not to say everyone must get vaccinated, but it is to say, please make sure you are making an informed decision and not informed by TikTok, Instagram, podcast, or from your uncle, unless, of course, he's a scientific pediatric researcher, and definitely not just by feelings. Here's what I want to leave with today. The science on vaccines is not uncertain. It is among the most thoroughly examined bodies of evidence in modern medicine. People have been convinced otherwise, not because the data changed, but because the environment in which we receive and process information has changed in ways that favor novelty, fear, and cultural identity over evidence. Public health became a political issue not because viruses changed their behavior, but because political actors and grifters found it useful. That has costs, and the costs are measurable. They show up in case counts and hospitalizations rates, and in the worst case, in the deaths of kids who had no say in the matter. And I want to be honest about the consistency question, because I think it's the most important thing I said today. The standard of evidence you apply to what you put in your body should not shift based on who made it or how it's marketed. Apply the same curiosity to your supplements that you apply to your vaccines. Ask the same questions, because if you do, you'll find the answers land in a very different place than the algorithm wants you to think. Listen, I know this is going to upset some people, and there's going to be a lot of pushback on anything that I say about this topic. And I know people will say, well, he's a plastic surgeon. What do we care about what he thinks? But the reality is that this stuff affects everyone. It affects my patients. It affects my family. My mom is immunocompromised and has been for some time. And I think anyone out there probably has those people in their lives. So I say this as someone who cares about you, who cares about my family, who cares about my patients. And I just want you to know the information, and what you do with it is totally up to you. So if you found this useful, share it. Not to win an argument, but to give someone information they might not have had access to. Follow Honestly on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Leave a comment And if you have questions about specific vaccines, specific supplements, and specific peptides in the context of your own health, that's exactly what a good physician is there for. I know this is a little bit deeper of a topic, but thank you for listening. I'm Chris Lee, MD. This is Honestly. See you out there.